Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Soffer from Modern Loss, and I'm so delighted you're here for 1-800-Flowers Light After Loss series. We have so many episodes available that you should check out. Every single month, we talk to a different expert, thought leader, creative person that can talk to us about a very narrowly focused angle around the long arc of loss. What does it mean to build community through it, to help yourself through it, to find meaning through it? And I've been so grateful to the 1-800-Flowers team over the last few years for allowing me to kind of play in this space. They are highly aware that, these beautiful floral arrangements that we see are not only sent in times of joy, but in bittersweet times, in times of sadness, in times of loneliness and confusion. And that is why I just really love working with them. So I'm so happy you're here for our November episode. And I'm especially delighted to have this month's guest. She finally said, yes, I'm just so happy. I'm a big fan. Her name is Priya Parker, and she's a facilitator, a strategic advisor, and the acclaimed author of The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters. She's also an executive producer and host of the New York Times podcast, Together Apart. And she's trained in the field of conflict resolution and has spent 20 years guiding leaders and groups through very complicated conversations about community and identity and vision at moments of transition. Her book, as I mentioned earlier, The Art of Gathering, is such a beautiful thing. It's not only literally beautiful to look at, which is nice because it just kind of sits on my coffee table and makes me look good to people, but it has taught me so much. Her writings online, her Instagram feed, everything has been just so amazing to me, and I'm delighted she's here because today we are going to be talking about the thing that a lot of us are thinking about, which is the holidays. We are in full-on holiday season. It's officially the holidays right through January 1st. And that is a very mixed bag of feelings for those of us who are kind of moving through lots of celebratory, twinkly light events, office gatherings, family gatherings, friend gatherings, and also kind of missing somebody, missing a loved one, a mentor, a friend, somebody in your life, a pet who is no longer here with you, whether they recently died or they haven't been around for a while. The holidays are really, really confusing. And we could all use some really good advice for how to tease some meaning out of them, and also how to get together in ways that make us feel good because we deserve it. So Priya, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I am looking forward to having this conversation and love the work of Modern Loss.
Oh, thank you. That's very, very flattering. So Priya, you use the word gathering instead of hosting because you believe that guests actually have a lot of influence over how these experiences go when people get together. It's not just about the person inviting, it's about the invitee. So I'm curious, what kind of advice would you have for a guest who is living with loss or another difficult thing? There's a lot of difficult things out there that people have to go through: illness, different struggles, job loss. And what advice would you have for them in terms of deciding how to attend a holiday gathering for any number of reasons? Like how do you decide what you say yes to during a time where you're getting a lot of invitations, but maybe you just want to piece out of some of them?
I would like to invite you to practice what I call intentional guesting. So we've heard about nutritional diets, what you put in your body and what you choose not to put in your body. We've heard about informational diets, perhaps a couple decades later, in terms of what we choose to read, how we choose to Zoom or doom scroll or not. And I wanted to exactly to the idea of a gathering diet. And that's both as a host and as a guest. And so if you are part of any communities, if you are part of friend groups, if you are part of a organization or any type of association, you're probably receiving many invitations. And the first step to having more meaningful gatherings is to become more discerning about what you say yes to and what you say no to. And so the practice of intentional guesting is being more thoughtful about what you attend, when you attend, how you attend, and what you say yes to and what you say no to. And it starts with a very simple step, which is when you receive an invitation, to not knee-jerk respond, but to actually just pause and to notice in your body, how's it feel?
Mm-hmm.
Am I feeling dread looking at this invitation? Am I feeling excitement? Am I feeling joy? And just noticing, locating the actual emotion that when you have an incoming missive, how does that actually land on you? And then make a decision about whether you practice a connected no or an enthusiastic yes.
What's a connected no? I like this. This is like very mindfulness based, really, right? It's really a mind body experience, figuring out who you're going to allow to be in your presence and vice versa.
And who you chase after to
Hmm.
be delighted in their presence.
Hmm.
I believe gathering is sacred. Right? If all we have is our time, right, as this community knows very well, if all we have is our time and all we have is our time with other people, to actually be intentional about how we're spending it and who we're spending it with is the beginning of that process. And gatherings don't begin at the moment people enter the room or enter the Zoom. They begin at the moment of invitation, both as a host, but also as a guest, in the mind of the guest of, oh, this thing, this future happening is occurring, right? Do I want to go to that thing? And
Hmm.
so often guests do have power in gatherings. You can feel it when you're someplace and like a lot of the guests don't really want to be there, right? People are texting, people are looking over their shoulders, wondering, people are kind of out of it. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to really anybody. And so
Hmm.
the first step to becoming a more intentional guest is to actually really think about whether or not and how one can actually attend, what your presence is going to be like at the gathering. And a connected no, so let me sit back for a second. I think about an invitation almost as a host, like throwing a ball, right, to a guest or to multiple guests. And part of being a good guest is actually catching that ball and then throwing it back. And we think about throwing it, we assume that throwing it back only means one thing, which means saying, yes, I'll come to your gathering. But actually, you can throw back the ball and say yes, or you can also throw back the ball and practice a connected no. The only thing of not throwing the ball back is actually ambivalence, right? It's flaking, it's ghosting, it's keeping the kind of invitation in your head open that actually is just kind of like leaking everybody's energy. And so a connected no is actually pausing, thinking intentionally about whether or not one wants to attend, and then writing back a response that honors the invitation, that honors the host, that perhaps values the relationship between the two, that might create a different pathway to how you might want to hang out with that person if you're not up for this time. It's basically realizing you can still be in relationship with someone without saying yes all the time.
Hmm. Yeah. And if you are somebody, let's say that, earlier this year, your mom passed away or you had a miscarriage and, you're still in that roller coaster of time where, 4 o'clock on Tuesday looks very different from 10 a.m. the following day, right? Like, what do you suggest for somebody who is living with such a deep loss and who might actually need to call an audible when the time actually comes? Like, how can we also kind of pass on things that we might have committed to while also not feeling guilty because of the very real time that we're living? I mean, the very difficult things that we're experiencing.
With people in your life with whom you want to have an authentic connection with, to just let them know what's going on. Again, I would say when we practice intentional guesting and we kind of know the space that we're in, right? In most traditional societies, when one has experienced deep loss, there's a period of grieving, right? That's a period of mourning in which there's specific prayers, right? There's specific activations, not just for the mourner, but for the community around the mourner. And so much of modern life is for a lot of different reasons. People may not know that we are in mourning. People may not know that we are in grief. And so there's some kind of stepping back and knowing that if one is in a period of that for any reason of loss, to activate one's community, if and as appropriate, to kind of let them know. Part of modern life that is quite lonely is we often don't know one another's sorrows. We don't know one another's griefs, one another's holding of one another's pain. And it's actually a community responsibility and opportunity to help hold that weight. And so in the context of grief, in the context of loss, at some level, I'm less worried about what's the tactical way to decline at the last minute, to step back sort of a little bit further and to think about, in my communities, in my friendships, where and how can I let people know if they don't know? Hopefully they know and can kind of have empathy for what you might be going through. But how do we kind of, across diverse experiences, share a larger context, and so there's more grace within our communities?
Mhm. No, I love that because I think that, it's really hard for people to intuit what you're going through unless you
Absolutely.
really do dip your toe in the water. And I know it's scary. By the way, anybody who's watching this, it's hard to practice what I preach sometimes. It's scary to put yourself out there, but you're never going to know, if that person is a person who gets it, that person who invited you, who you're just not feeling it. You just need to say, it's been a it's been a rough time, and I think today's a hard day. I'm so sorry, but
Totally.
today's not, I
It's
can't attend today.
I'm sort of thinking about this as we're in our conversation, but
Mhm.
I'm a conflict resolution facilitator. I work with communities that that contain within them some amount of diversity, which, by the way, is every community, right?
Mhm.
Every community, every individual contains multitudes, and at some level, I think those who are or have experienced grief are a specific type of identity. And so often there are, as you're thinking about even the gatherings, maybe there's like an asterisk to the intentional guesting, which is like, where are the people and who are the people who share this identity, who share this experience, who understand, even if it's not the same loss, they know what it's like to experience loss. They understand the cycles, they understand the last minuteness. And,
Mhm.
and at some level, who do I gravitate to in those moments? And having empathy for those who haven't perhaps experienced those kinds of deep loss, to know that actually intimacy across diversity requires a little bit of education on both sides. And the last thing I'll say is the purpose, I hope, of these gatherings, whatever type they are, is connection. And so at some level, I think that's why I say it's a connected no. I think there are ways to close the door and actually maintain or even increase connection through the no than going through kind of teeth gritted yeses.
Right.
And the last thing I'll say is, so often we can also surprise ourselves by the medicine we didn't know we needed. And so sometimes when we're ambivalent to, actually, I know this has been an experience for me, when I kind of don't feel like going to something, and then I end up going, and I'm so happy I went because it was the medicine I didn't realize I needed. And so there's sort of creating grace and openness and curiosity for ourselves and for one another.
Mhm. So, what are some ways in which family members, this is a time where a lot of families are getting together, a lot of different dynamics, a lot of personalities. I'm sure it's familiar
I
to
don't know what
every
you're talking
human
about.
person watching this, unless I'm living in my own
Exactly.
planet.
If you're watching
Um,
this, blink twice if you know what we're talking
yeah,
about.
if you don't, then I'm very envious of you. But look, even people within the same family grieve differently, and especially, emotions can be extra charged around the holidays. So, what are some ways in which family members can plan meaningful gatherings over this holiday season when someone important is no longer around? What are some, maybe rituals or conversations that you can
Yeah, I love
suggest to
this
people?
question.
Thank you.
I have a monthly newsletter. It's free and public. And the most recent one was actually called Meaning as Medicine.
Hmm.
And looking at this moment for so many of us as we're entering, that can be tender. And one of the kind of practices that we can get better at as gatherers. I believe anyone can gather well. You don't need to be an extrovert. You don't need to have a fancy house. It's a skill. It's a skill one can learn. And one of the skills to be a artful gatherer is to be a meaning maker, somebody who helps and invites others into whatever the context is, creating meaning together. So one of
Mhm.
the examples I used in this month's newsletter was a friend of mine whose grandmother died the year before. And her mother was going to host Thanksgiving. It was the first Thanksgiving for the family without their matriarch, without their grandmother. And everybody was still pretty rattled by the loss. And so Amanda asked her mother what she would like this Thanksgiving to feel like. And her mother said, comfort and happiness. And part of what Amanda was trying to figure out is like, how much do we dial up kind of grandma? How much do we dial down? Like, like this is still very tender. And so her kind of solution, this beautiful invention, was she, ahead of time, again, a gathering begins well before anyone enters. She emailed all of her cousins and siblings and relatives who were coming for Thanksgiving, and she asked them to each send her a few songs, 1 or 2 songs that brings them comfort and happiness.
Mm.
And she created a playlist specifically for Thanksgiving. And when everyone arrived over the course of the evening, she played this one playlist. And part of what happened was, first of all, the songs themselves were full of comfort and happiness. But as people heard the songs come on, they say, oh, that's my song. And they started sharing stories of why that song gives them comfort or happiness. They hummed along to songs that their grandmother loved. There was this context, this shared meaning, music as medicine, that they each kind of co-created together through the super simple mechanism, right? A playlist. And it was, she found kind of, she told me later, it was just the right level of summoning. And
That's
so part of the part is so beautiful to sort of think about, like, for your family, for this group, what's the right level of summoning, and how might we do this in a way that invites and includes people at the level that they would like to participate.
Yep. And I like that you pointed out that she did this in advance. She didn't put people on the spot. She didn't say, everyone now look at Spotify in the living room and choose something. They had advance warning. They could figure out how much they wanted to participate. They could figure out the mood of the song. She gave her guests, her other relatives, control over their choices within this structure that she created. And I love that idea because I feel like you can do that with food, with
Yes.
meals, with stories
Yes.
around the table.
Yes.
Please
Bring
think
her
of a
favorite
certain
dish.
memory.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
right.
Or
And
and humor, right? Bring her favorite dish, or bring their favorite dish, or bring all the things we could never eat when grandma was around, right? Like,
oh, I
there's so
love
many, it's
that.
like it's like knowing your audience, knowing your group. I'm a conflict resolution facilitator, and I think of gatherings as these like temporary constitutions, right?
Mm,
We make them up, we invent them. And so often, particularly when there's higher risk, what I would call higher risk, and those experiencing loss and grief, when there's higher tenderness, when people aren't fully sure how to be,
yes.
the way to actually think about how to host or how to guest is to think well ahead of time. What is our need this year?
Yep.
How might we come together? What is our
I,
purpose in this gathering? And
that's
starting
great.
well ahead of time, so you're guiding people through the invitation about what they can expect when they arrive.
And that's just a really nice way, a structure for commemorating loved one during gatherings without overshadowing the spirit of celebration, because it's not like you're
Absolutely.
disrespecting the loss,
Both are
because there's
true.
kind of no such thing. You are
Yes.
allowed to glean some joy and meaning from this. And you should,
Not just
because you're very
allowed,
much
like,
around. You owe it to yourself, right?
connection is the antidote to grief. Connection is the antidote to loneliness. Connection and being together with one another in authentic ways is medicine. And doing that in a way that is with one another without denying the context, but also allowing for so many things to be true, is our way through.
Priya, I love everything you said just now, because it just, when I think of my dad died in 2010. And when I think of him, I think of humor. He's the one who taught me to love Mel Brooks, Sid Caesar, Rob Reiner, Carl Reiner. I mean, yes, I'm basically like an old man when it comes to an old Jewish when it comes to my humor preferences. But,
Totally.
I think of him, and one of his favorite things to do every 6 months, he invited all of his old guy friends together, and he called it the Laughers Club. And they sat around for hours at a time in my house, in my living room, telling the best jokes that they had heard over the last few months. And so a couple Hanukkahs ago, I had a Hanukkah gathering, and I asked people, bring like the best jokes that you got.
Amazing.
I
I
don't care
love
if
all
they're
of this.
dirty or raunchy or anything, because yeah, like I miss my dad every single day. And to add
Yes.
insult to injury, he died on December 17th,
Mm.
a highly insulting date
So
to,
rude.
to lose your dad in the middle of all the things, right?
Yeah,
And so just to like tease that like essence of him
beautiful. It's
and realize that
beautiful.
I actually had agency over
Yes,
bringing that into
yes,
my celebration, even though it's
yes,
always going to be tinged with
yes,
bittersweetness, with sadness. I mean, and there will
yes.
be some years, I just want to acknowledge to people who are watching this, where you may not want to do any of this. And that's
Absolutely.
right. That's cool.
Absolutely. And that solitude is another way to also connect with a memory, to connect with oneself, to grieve. Like, it's not that gathering is for everything. I mean, often we are gathering. I'm not saying gather more. I'm saying gather better. And often gathering better is gathering
Mm,
less. Right. So this is like, please don't misunderstand that gathering is the solution to everything. You can gather, people can gather badly. You can gather and feel more isolated. This is really an invitation to pause and ask, what might feel good this year? What do I need? Who do I want to be with? And if I can just tease a few elements about this example of yours that I just love so much. So if we talked about the music example, the context was having this shared song, right? As this kind of way for people to spark memories, to spark stories, to sing together. Part of what you did that was so brilliant is you were thinking about this person, your father, who contains multitudes,
yes.
and thinking about one activity that he loved, right? One element of his personality. And then thinking about how can we, right? You're literally in, this is what ritual is. This is what how you invent tradition. You literally think about that element and you bring it and you invite others and you tell the story. You explain to people why you're asking them to bring these jokes, right? You're tying the thread. You're a meaning maker. You're tying the thread as to why you're doing this. And then part of what is so lovely about the humor and the bringing, like, the raunchiest jokes, whatever, is we're then not flattening the dead,
Yeah.
right? They
Right.
were full characters. All of us are.
Right.
And so you're allowing for this kind of like whole shape of a person to remember, and then to remember in our own selves that we contain multitudes. A friend of mine, her grandmother passed away when her mother was 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And she and her cousin started a tradition maybe 8 years ago where they each inherited their grandmother's like martini glasses. They each had one.
Mm-hmm.
And every year on her death anniversary, they would get together in person. They would sip gin martinis, which is her favorite drink. And
Sounds
her
fabulous.
cousin, who was 8 years older than her, would like tell stories about his grandmother. And it was a simple invented ritual. And then the pandemic hit and they couldn't meet in person, and they ended up started doing it on Zoom. And then again, rituals change, needs change, circumstances change. They invited their extended family into their gin martini story hour and continue to do it each year. And so again, like thinking about what a person represented, or simply like an activity they love to do. And it doesn't always have to be so over the head. If a beloved loved to go, I live in New York, if they love to go to the Met, if they love to go to the Yankees game, right? It's like going and doing that same similar tradition. I'll give another example. There was a neighbor of mine who passed away, who was very beloved, and she and her family were always the people in the neighborhood who were very excited about Halloween and pumpkin
Mm-hmm.
carving. But they weren't just like, three triangles and a smiley face. They
They,
would
they were
they
they were
would bring
those
it
people.
was like
Right.
David Bowie and like the
Right.
big
Oh, that's
event of the
amazing.
year, and I mean, incredible. And after she passed, the neighbors gathered, and none of them really know what they're doing, but they learned like, oh, there are stencils you can buy online, there's shapes you can print out. And they gathered as neighbors every year, 5 days before Halloween, and basically continued the tradition of stenciling pumpkins together. And they like super, and they brought out her favorite croissants from a local bakery to just serve as everyone is having it, right? Not sort of pounding you on the head over it, but
Right.
this deep honoring that continued to actually create connection, that
Yes.
continued.
And help people witness like it's like sometimes you wish, let's say it's Christmas or it's like Kwanzaa, it's New Year's, and you're around people and you're mourning this loss of this person and you're holding this just depth of void inside of your heart, and you just wish they could know a little bit about the person that you're missing. Maybe they don't know them too well. When you do things like this, the song, the food, the stenciling David Bowie, you're actually having them witness not only your loss, but they're getting to know a little bit about that person and kind of fall in love with them a little bit.
Yeah,
If you want them to,
absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
just, it's nice.
And
Like, you don't need the microchip, just your actions
yes,
are the microchip.
yes. I mean, another example, a friend of mine, and all the examples I share, I have permission to share. Her father died, and like so many of us, he lived not only in a different city, in a different country. And she went back to attend the funeral, and and she came back, and I asked her, how are you doing? How was it? And she said it was very beautiful to be with my childhood friends, but I was really a support to my mother. I haven't grieved for me, but no one here knows him. No one here ever met him. And so she invented a ritual where she invited 40 friends. Again, in the invitation, she explained it. She said, please you can wear dark colors. Well, this will go for about 90 minutes. It's part of modern gathering is we kind of have to explain. We don't come from similar cultures. We don't necessarily come from similar ways of doing. And at the end, we will feast. And people came and they were so delighted to be invited. And she sat and she said, we're kind of making this up, but I realized that part of modern life is I am grieving somebody who I love, who has shaped me. So much of who I am is who he was. But you, as my adult friends, have never met him. And so I wanted to tell you about him. And she brought out photos and she shared stories, and we laughed and we cried and we heard and saw our friend through her father. And then she said, if there's anything you all would like to share, it was almost like there needed to be kind of a call and response. And then sort of like popcorn, people just shared stories and memories of their losses. And particularly in cities and places, we don't always know what we're carrying. And it was this sort of beautiful, invented kind of immigrant diaspora ritual. And then at the end, she played a song that he would always, a prayer that he would always play in his morning shower, and we listened to it, and then we broke and we ate. And it was so beautiful because she was cognizant enough in that moment to kind of understand and detangle all of these different needs and roles that she played. And she asked with care and with humility and with vulnerability for what she needed. But part of the power was it can feel selfish, but it was such a gift. It was such a gift to all of us to be able to hold shared and unshared grief together.
You kind of, it's like you jumped inside my head because you stole my last question. You already made such a beautiful case for it, which is, what type of benefits do we get from gathering in difficult times, even when they're during holiday times, when you're supposed to theoretically be into the twinkly lights and the gifts and all this and all the no, these holiday times are sometimes the most difficult times because they throw into sharp relief our losses. They are only more highlighted. And so just these examples that you gave clearly show what the benefits are of gathering. There are times when, as you said earlier, solitude can be very much our friend. We don't always have to share our headspace and our heart space with other people physically. Sometimes we need it for ourselves. But, community, I mean, grieving is such an individual experience. There's no way around that. There's no possible way around it. But it doesn't have to be an isolating one, right?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful distinction. I've been learning more about the Good Grief Network lately, and a lot of their work, as I understand it, is helping parents hold climate crisis and grief of their children.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the sentences I recently read about their work is, as parents, we can't prevent them from experiencing the crisis, but we can prevent them from being alone with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so much of the summoning of community is connection. You can be with other people and feel very isolated. You can also be alone and feel very satisfied. And the invitation is to be intentional about how you spend your time, and to be intentional about what the need is for you and for those in your community, and to find simple, invented, thoughtful, creative invitations to gather in ways that are nourishing for you and the people around you.
This has been honestly amazing, Priya. I would like to move into your living room and just benefit from your wisdom all the time. I feel like I just have so much more to learn from you. As a highly social person, I like to think of myself as like an introverted extrovert, like somebody who just they love being around people, but I can't do it without the recharge time and the
Me too.
reflection time. Everything you've said has been so helpful as we're in the throes of this like celebratory holiday season. I'm just so grateful that you've shared your wisdom with everybody watching on Light After Loss. And anybody who is watching, please feel free to add a comment, add a question, share who it is that you're missing during this holiday season, and always maybe share one of the traditions that you've come up with that have helped you and your family. Help each other out in the comments section, as they say. So I just want to thank deeply Priya Parker. She is the author of The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters, and the author and creator of so many other things. We will link to it. Thank you so much, Priya, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I wanted to share with you all a free workbook to, if you're thinking about planning a more meaningful gathering, a more connected gathering, that it's free. It's on my website, priyaparker.com. Maybe someone can drop into the chat to actually think through, how do you create a gathering like Rebecca was talking about, but for you? Again, it's not rocket science. You don't need to be an extrovert. Most of the best gatherers I know are actually introverts creating the gatherings they wish existed in the world. And I'm so happy to be with you all.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a meaningful holiday season and take some
Thank
of your
you.
own advice.
Thank you so much. And you.